You were supposed to die. Maybe it was a car accident, maybe a heart attack, maybe something small, a slip on the stairs. But you didn't. You're still here. And here's the question no one wants to ask. What if you didn't survive because you were lucky, but because you can't die at all? What if reality has quietly split, branched, reshaped itself in the background, leaving this version of you alive while others faded into silence? What if, buried inside quantum physics, is a truth so strange, so disorienting, that it redefines not only death, but you? Please like and subscribe because this journey will change how you see our place in the universe. Prepare yourselves. We begin. The illusion starts small. An electron, floating in isolation, isn't what it seems. You'd think it would spin in a direction like a coin flipping through space, but it doesn't. Not until we look. Until that moment, it hovers in a blur of all possibilities at once. Spin up and spin down, left and right, here and there. It exists not as a thing, but as a cloud of maybes. A shimmering spectrum of what could be. This isn't science fiction. This is quantum mechanics, the most precise theory humanity has ever constructed. And at its core is a radical betrayal of common sense. We once thought reality was stable, that objects had positions, that causes had effects, that nature followed rules. Newton built a clockwork universe. Einstein bent it with gravity. But quantum physics? It set fire to the floor beneath our feet. Because in this realm, particles don't have definite properties. They're probabilities in waiting for something, someone, to demand an answer. And when that happens, when we observe them, something collapses. A decision is made. Reality, as if startled, settles into one path. But before that moment, it was many. Not metaphorically, literally. The famous double-slit experiment tears the veil off this madness. Fire electrons, one by one, at a barrier with two slits. You'd expect two clusters on the screen behind it. But instead, an interference pattern appears, ripples, waves, a fingerprint of possibilities, as if each particle had split itself and passed through both slits at once, as if it existed in two places, simultaneously interfering with itself. But place a detector at one of the slits, watch the path, and the interference vanishes. The wave collapses, the particle picks a side. Observation has rewritten the outcome. This isn't just weird, it's profound. It suggests that reality is not passive, that the universe doesn't exist in a definite state until it is touched, measured, observed. That we might be part of the machinery that collapses the infinite into the now, but the mystery deepens. Because if electrons are quantum, what about photons? Atoms? Molecules? You? Where does the chain stop? Most physicists will tell you it's not about consciousness, it's about interaction. Any disturbance, say, a random photon brushing by, can trigger collapse. But that only shifts the question. If the photon is quantum too, then it should also be in a superposition. The chain doesn't end, it grows. Every interaction entangles with the next. Every measurement bleeds uncertainty into something else. Until everything is tangled, everything is smeared, everything is everywhere. But we don't experience that. We don't live in a soup of overlapping selves. We see a cat, not a blur. We hear one sound, not 1,000 possibilities echoing. So something must be missing. Or worse, something is happening behind the scenes that we can't perceive. A secret branching of realities, hidden by the veil of familiarity. A quiet splitting that leaves us always in the version of the story where we wake up, where we go, on where we asterisk, don't die. Richard Feynman, one of the architects of quantum theory, once admitted, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." He wasn't being humble, he was being honest. The theory works. It predicts outcomes to an absurd degree of precision. But what it says about the nature of reality, that remains an open wound. The wave function, the beautiful, eerie formula Schrödinger wrote down to describe this haze of possibilities, tells us how particles evolve in superposition. But what makes them choose? And why? For a long time, the answer was, they collapse. That was the Copenhagen interpretation, that superpositions persist until observation forces them to pick a state. It's a neat answer. It fits the data, but it leaves everything else in darkness. What is observation? Why should anything collapse? Why now, and not a moment later? And so the cracks begin to show. Maybe collapse isn't real. Maybe nothing ever chooses. Maybe the electron doesn't pick a slit. Maybe it always goes through both. Maybe we don't live in one universe at all. Maybe we live in all of them and simply ride the wave of one. In other words, maybe the wave never dies. Maybe the wave is reality. And maybe you are a ripple in that ocean, unaware of all the versions of you that didn't make it. Yet, and then came the cat. A thought experiment so simple, so absurd, it was meant to mock quantum mechanics, yet it ended up revealing the deepest crack in the nature of reality. Imagine a cat placed in a box, sealed from the world. Inside, a device waits. A single quantum event, say, the spin of an electron has a 50% chance of triggering a hammer, which shatters a vial of poison. One click of fate, and the cat dies. Another, and it lives. But until you open the box, quantum mechanics tells us something strange. The electron is in superposition. It hasn't chosen, and so neither has the cat. It is not dead. It is not alive. It is both, not metaphorically, mathematically, because the device is entangled with the electron, and the cat is entangled with the device. And so, their destinies blur into one tangled waveform, a superposition of death and breath, fur and silence. Schrödinger thought this would expose the absurdity of applying quantum logic to everyday life. Instead, it exposed the deeper absurdity of thinking we ever lived in just one reality. Because if the electron can be in a mixed state, and the device responds to it, and the cat responds to the device, then what about us, the observers? If we are made of atoms no different, no more special, then we too must enter the superposition when we open the box. There is now a version of you that sees a living cat, and a version that sees a corpse. So when, exactly, does the wave collapse? Is it at the level of consciousness? At the flicker of neural awareness? Or is the collapse an illusion? If we follow the logic far enough, we begin to lose our grip on the very concept of a classical world. The boundary between quantum and classical, once thought to be sharp and sacred, begins to dissolve. Every particle, every atom, every neuron, all of it obeys the same quantum rules. There is no dividing line. We are Schrödinger's cat, our thoughts, our perceptions, our lives entangled with infinite versions of reality, splitting and evolving, second by second. But something in us rebels. Surely, we say, there must be a point where quantum fuzziness gives way to solid truth. We look around and see no superpositions. We don't see tables phasing through walls, or people flickering in and out of existence. We see consistency. We see classicality. But that's only because we don't see what we're not allowed to. Because quantum physics has a trick up its sleeve. It's called decoherence. It's not collapse. It's not consciousness. It's something colder, something mathematical. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, when it becomes entangled with trillions of other particles, its phase information gets scrambled, like a chorus of perfect voices, slowly turning to noise. The interference fades. The superpositions vanish not by dying, but by hiding. Each possibility becomes a separate strand of reality, unable to talk to the others. The branching doesn't stop. It just becomes invisible. This, some say, is the key. The universe doesn't collapse into one outcome. It splits, endlessly, silently, every time a decision is made, every time a photon bounces, every time you blink, a new world is born. You don't notice, because in each branch, your memories stay intact. You go on, unaware that infinite versions of you are peeling away in parallel timelines, some laughing, some crying, some no longer breathing. You are the observer, but you are also the observed. The Copenhagen interpretation tells us that the wave function collapses when we look, but it never explains why or how. It makes observation a kind of magic, arbitrary, undefined. It works in equations, but it leaves reality hanging in the air like a half-told story. So maybe collapse never happens. Maybe the wave just keeps going, unbroken. That's what Hugh Everett believed. In 1957, he proposed something that changed everything: the many worlds interpretation. A radical idea, dismissed in his time, now considered one of the leading contenders for the true nature of quantum reality. Everett's claim was simple: take the math seriously. The wave function doesn't collapse, it evolves. Every possible outcome of every quantum event happens, just not in the same branch. No magic, no collapse, just branching universes, splitting endlessly like the limbs of a cosmic tree. Each version of you exists, sees one outcome, and continues. But the others continue too, just in a reality you can never touch. It's elegant. It's terrifying. It means that right now, as you read this, a near infinite number of yous are reading it in 1,000 different emotional states. Some with different lives, some with different regrets, some who never clicked at all, and some who didn't survive the day. The question isn't whether superposition ends, it's whether you ever do. If you can only experience branches where you remain conscious, then perhaps, by sheer logic, you always will. You won't notice the versions where you died. You'll always wake up. The cat refused to die, and maybe, so do you. It was 1957, and a young physicist stood at the edge of madness or revelation. His name was Hugh Everett III, a quiet graduate student from Princeton, and he was about to do something that would make the gods of physics shake their heads. He would take the most forbidden step. He would believe the math. Everett looked at Schrödinger's equation, the equation that governs the evolution of quantum wave functions, and noticed something no one else dared to accept. Nowhere in that beautiful, deterministic, elegant equation was there any mention of collapse. Not one sign that the wave of possibilities should ever reduce to just one. The collapse, Everett realized, wasn't in the math. It was in us, in our assumptions, in our need for one clean, comfortable world. So what if the wave never collapses? What if it evolves forever? He proposed something both dazzling and disturbing. When a quantum event occurs, when a particle can go left or right, when an atom can decay or not decay, it does both, but not in the same world. The universe splits. One version contains the left turn, another the right. One sees the cat live, one sees it die, and another watches the box forever unopened. All possibilities are real, all outcomes happen, just not here. The idea was dismissed, brushed aside by the towering minds of the time as philosophical fancy, a curious footnote. But Everett saw something they didn't. He saw that by denying the collapse, he was freeing the universe from contradiction. He was giving the wave function the right to be complete, to be everything. The physics community wasn't ready. They needed simplicity. A world where one outcome wins and the others disappear. Everett offered no such comfort. His universe was an ocean of infinite forks, each possibility, cascading into another, all equally real, all equally unreachable. So they ignored him, turned away. And he, heartbroken, left academia, never publishing again. But the idea refused to die. Like a splinter in the mind of physics, the many worlds interpretation lingered. It whispered in the gaps of quantum equations. It clung to paradoxes unsolved. And slowly, decades later, it began to rise again. Because no one could explain collapse. Because decoherence gave the illusion of a single world without needing to destroy the others. Because in the cold logic of mathematics, Everett's idea worked. Enter Sean Carroll, David Deutsch, Max Tegmark, brilliant thinkers unafraid to follow the rabbit hole to its terrifying end. They resurrected Everett's vision, armed with new language, new tools, and the bravery to say what others feared. What if the universe is a wave, one gigantic, eternal wave, and we are just one thread of it? This wave, this universal wave function would contain all particles, all fields, all histories, all observers. It wouldn't collapse. It would evolve, eternally branching, like a river that splits and splits again, every drop carving a different future. But if that's true, why don't we feel the splits? Why don't the other worlds bleed into ours? The answer, they said, was decoherence. Think of quantum states like violins, all playing in harmony. In a small system, their waves line up, they can interfere. But as the system grows more complex, those waves lose sync. The interference vanishes, the music becomes noise, and with it, the paths stop talking. That's decoherence. It doesn't destroy the other branches, it just separates them perfectly, permanently. After decoherence, the branches are still there, like rooms sealed behind unbreakable walls. You can't hear them, you can't reach them, but they exist, and in each one, a different version of you walks forward, unaware of the others, sure that this is the only world that ever was. It's not. The split is not dramatic. There's no cosmic thunder, no sound of reality cracking open. It's silent, gradual, a smooth divergence, like a dream changing course while you sleep. And it never stops. From the moment of the Big Bang, branching has been happening, particles interacting, outcomes splitting, worlds blooming like galaxies. You are standing atop an impossible tower of versions, most of which you'll never know, but all of which are real. This is not metaphor. This is not science fiction. This is the logical consequence of quantum mechanics, without collapse. This is the price of taking the wave function seriously. It means that when you flip a coin, there isn't one result, there are two, and in each outcome, a different you watches it fall. There's even an app universe splitter that uses a quantum measurement in Switzerland to determine your actions. It asks you to choose a decision, go left or right, text or don't text, leap or wait. It sends a photon through a beam splitter, reads the result, and tells you which branch to follow. The idea is absurd, and yet it's real, because in one branch you obey, in another you don't. But if the branching is endless, if the wave never collapses, then you begin to wonder, what is the self? What is identity? What is choice? Are you truly deciding anything, or merely riding a tide of ever-splitting fates? And now the question grows darker, because if the wave never collapses, does death? If all outcomes happen, then there must be a branch where you didn't crash, didn't fall, didn't stop breathing. A branch where you went on, a branch where you always go on. Could it be that you are quantum immortal? You sit in a chair, a machine hums softly beside you, smooth, metallic, clinical. It holds no hatred, no malice, just precision. Every second, it flips a quantum coin. If the particle it measures spins one way, nothing happens, just a click. If it spins the other, instant death, painless, faster than your brain can register. A clean erasure of being. You breathe, the machine clicks, you're still here. Another second, another spin. Click, still here, and again. Click, still breathing. After 10 rounds, you're nervous. After 50, terrified. After 100, shaken, but still alive. Statistically impossible. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, you should have died ages ago. The odds were stacked against you, 1 in a trillion. Yet here you are. How? Because in Everett's universe, you cannot die. Max Tegmark called it quantum Russian roulette, and though he never suggested anyone try it, never will the logic is clean, brutal, and unflinching. Every time the gun fires, the universe split. In most branches you die, but in one, you don't. And in that branch, only in that branch, your consciousness continues. That's the branch you inhabit, always. You don't experience death. You don't observe non-existence. You simply go on. The idea is horrifying, not because it's grotesque, but because it's so calm, so mathematical, so silent. You never see the other branches, the ones where your body falls limp, where your story ends. You are always the version that wakes up, the version that hears the click, the version that survived. Every time, it's not that you're lucky, it's that in the multiverse, survival is guaranteed. Somewhere, somehow, there is always a branch where the quantum coin lands in your favor. And because you can't observe your own non-existence, Your awareness just keeps riding that narrow thread of survival, like walking a tightrope over an abyss of corpses you'll never see. This is quantum immortality. It doesn't mean your friends survive. It doesn't mean you stay young. It doesn't mean you get out unscathed. It just means you don't die. Not permanently. Not from your own point of view, and so you keep going, even when everything else falls away. But immortality has a price. Not all branches are kind. In fact, most are not. Philosopher David Lewis once considered this idea and saw a terrible fate waiting at the end of it. If you survive every lethal event, every car crash, every illness, every war, what's left is not a healthy body, but a broken one. The kind of survival that isn't clean, but compounded. You survive the explosion but lose your legs. You survive the disease but lose your mind. You survive again and again until survival becomes a curse. You don't become a god. You become a ghost trapped in meat. In Lewis's words, eternal life, on such terms, amounts to eternal torment. And suddenly, what began as a strange and brilliant idea becomes something darker, a slow-motion horror. The more you cheat death, the more it takes from you. You may never see the end, but you will feel it, piece by piece. The skin stays, the soul withers. Still, the logic holds, because all that's required is that you remain conscious. That's all. Not whole, not sane, just awake. Even unconsciousness becomes complicated. Think of anesthesia, sleep, gaps in memory. If your experience is cut off momentarily, does that break the thread? Or do you simply wake up in the branch where you regained awareness? Physicist Anthony Aguirre explored this paradox in his book Cosmological Koans, asking, shouldn't you always find yourself on the branch where you never fell asleep? Or is sleep itself a form of death from which quantum immortality revives you? And what of dreams? What of comas? Are these glimpses of our own many worlds resurrection? As you ask these questions, the ground shifts again. It's not just about dying anymore. It's about what it means to be you, and whether there's a version of you that drifts forever aging, broken, alone because all other versions of you ceased. The mind rebels. Surely, if this were true, we'd have noticed. Surely we'd feel the branching. But would we? Probability is slippery. According to the mediocrity principle, you should most likely find yourself in a typical state, surrounded by people, feeling healthy, alive, in a stable branch. That's what most yous experience. And that's what you're experiencing now. But wait long enough, and you won't be typical anymore. Your friends will pass, your world will change, your body will fail, and still, in some lonely branch, you'll remain. You might even reach a point where you're the last version of yourself alive, a body that won't stop, a consciousness clinging to the last thread of identity. In that moment, the dream of quantum immortality curdles into a nightmare of quantum persistence. You were supposed to die, but you didn't, and maybe you never will. You can feel it now, that tight discomfort coiling behind the awe, the sensation that something in this idea doesn't sit right. That quantum immortality, for all its logic and elegance, leans on something soft. Assumptions, interpretations, the kind of things that crumble if you press too hard. And so we press. The entire argument, this strange tale of endless survival, hinges on a quiet trick: how we treat probability in a universe where everything happens. In the Copenhagen view, probability is easy. The Born rule tells us that each possible outcome has a weight. A 50% chance for heads, a 50% chance for tails. One will happen, the other won't. Case closed. But in many worlds, both outcomes happen, every time. So what does probability even mean? If you always survive in some branch, then technically, yes, you go on. But if 99.999999% of branches contain a version of you that dies screaming in fire or silence, how much should that lone survivor version count? This is where David Lewis steps in with what he called the corrected intensity rule. According to Lewis, death is not a state you can experience. Once you're gone, you're not watching. You're not perceiving anything. Your subjective awareness, therefore, must always flow into the branches where you remain conscious. The dead versions don't count, not because they're not real, but because they're not you anymore. So you discard those branches. You throw away the ones where you die. You normalize the rest. And suddenly, from your perspective, survival becomes a certainty. The coin always lands on its edge. You are always the exception. But is this valid? Or is it a philosophical sleight of hand? Critics are not silent. Philosopher David Papineau argues that there's no reason why the usual rule, the one that weights every outcome by its quantum measure, shouldn't apply here too. The fact that you don't observe being dead doesn't mean the dead branches vanish. They're still part of the wave function, still real, still part of the math. Ignoring them isn't physics, it's wishful thinking. And David Deutsch, one of many world's most passionate defenders, also recoils from the immortality argument. He admits, this way of applying probabilities by erasing death branches is not something that flows from the core of quantum mechanics. It's an additional assumption, one not justified by the theory itself. You'd have to believe not only in many worlds, but in a kind of anthropic bias that always locks your awareness into the narrow corridor of survival. In other words, you're cheating. You're pretending you can sift through the infinite ocean of outcomes and cherry-pick only the ones where you win. But quantum physics doesn't work that way. It doesn't care what you feel. It doesn't protect your story. And yet, none of this disproves immortality either. That's what makes it maddening. Lewis's claim that your stream of consciousness can only continue in the branches where it remains intact is not absurd. It's just unprovable. No one can falsify it. No one can test it. Because the only person who could experience the truth of it is you, alone, in a single branch, watching everyone else fade. That's the strange irony. If quantum immortality is real, it is real only to you, a private miracle, a secret buried so deeply in perception that no one else can ever confirm it. Imagine a person plays quantum Russian roulette and survives. Again, 100 times. To everyone else, they're dead. But to them, the clicks keep coming. The silence keeps returning. They are the ghost threading through impossible odds, yet no one can follow. No one can observe their proof. Truth, in this scenario, becomes unshareable. It's like a lighthouse seen only from one boat. Everyone else says darkness. And now the question blooms outward. If quantum immortality depends on the branches where you live, then why are you here right now? Why are you not old, broken, alone, decaying in some long tale of improbable survival? Shouldn't that be more likely? Shouldn't the fact that you're reading these words, alive, awake, and presumably healthy, be suspicious? Because in the many worlds view, the vast majority of your future selves after a million branchings will not be lucky. They will be deteriorated, disfigured. Some will be trapped in bodies with no voices. Some will outlive their minds. If you truly survive forever, then your timeline should be overrun by these Struldbrugs, the deathless beings from Gulliver's Travels who live forever in physical ruin. And yet here you are, not ancient, not suffering, just alive. That's a problem. It implies that either quantum immortality is false, or that you are somehow exceptional, that your current experience is rarer than you think, and that in itself becomes a kind of paradox. A version of the doomsday argument in disguise, because if your existence is so rare, then why are you experiencing this moment and not one of the billions more in your decaying future? Maybe it's luck, or maybe something's wrong with the theory. But quantum physics doesn't flinch. It doesn't offer comfort. It just watches silently while we try to assign meaning to the wave. And so the question remains, hanging in the air like a coin suspended mid-flip. If you always survive, then who exactly is surviving? Is it you? Or is it someone wearing your memories like a mask? How long until you can't tell the difference? And how long until you wonder if you're already the low probability outcome? Already the one who shouldn't be here? Already the ghost? What does it mean to survive if you're no longer yourself? What does it mean to be you when there are infinite copies of you all believing they are the original? Quantum immortality promises continuity, that you will go on, but it never stops to ask the one question that cracks it open from the inside. Who is the you that continues? We imagine ourselves as solid, singular, a thread that weaves through time, one thought after another, bound together by memory and flesh. But in the many worlds interpretation, that thread unravels. Every moment becomes a branching. Every choice, every breath, every neuron firing splits you into someone else, someone almost identical, but not quite. A sibling in consciousness, a cousin in causality, a stranger with your face. And here's the cosmic joke. Each of them feels like you. Each one remembers being you. Each one carries your name, your fears, your hopes. But from the instant of divergence, they are no longer the same. They walk different paths. They fall in love with different people. They survive different accidents. They die at different times. So which one is really you? All of them? None of them? Or just the one asking the question? Physicist Brian Greene has offered a poetic answer. He says we must learn to expand our definition of self, that every copy is truly you, that you is not a point but a wave, not a thread but a cloud, a swarm of consciousnesses, each believing they are the center, each unaware of the others. In his view, the self is a sum total, a collective of realities you'll never see. But not everyone agrees. Physicist Lev Vaidman takes a colder view. He concedes that in other branches there are beings identical to him, with his thoughts and voice, but he says it's meaningless to say they are him. They are copies, splinters, echoes, not the I who speaks in this moment. To him, identity is tied to the now, to the current thread. The rest are noise. And then there's David Wallace, who pushes the thought deeper into the abyss. He argues that the concept of I only makes sense in a universe where identity is confined to a single branch. But in the quantum multiverse, no such confinement exists. The walls are down, the paths are infinite, and so the very concept of selfhood begins to collapse. Not gradually, but fundamentally, you are not a continuous soul, surfing safely through the ocean of reality. You are a discontinuous sequence of moments, scattered across space-time, stitched together only by the illusion of narrative. In the many worlds universe, you becomes an outdated concept, like the Earth at the center of the cosmos, like a flat world at the edge of the stars. And suddenly, quantum physics is no longer just breaking matter, it's breaking meaning. This isn't just about physics anymore. This is metaphysics. This is psychology. This is existential collapse. Because if the self is not singular, if your consciousness can splinter into a million pieces, each equally valid, each equally real, then what anchors you? What gives you continuity? What makes your life your life? We talk about free will, about decisions, about the weight of consequences. But if every possibility is realized somewhere, then what is a choice? You went left and right. You said yes and no. You lived and died. The self becomes a coin in quantum limbo, never landing, forever flipping. You are both observer and observed, subject and object. You are Schrödinger's soul, both whole and fragmented, collapsed and spread. And perhaps, in the quiet folds of the multiverse, you are beginning to feel it, that dizziness, that ghostly suspicion that you're not as whole as you once believed. That maybe, late at night, when the world is quiet and your thoughts wander into places they shouldn't, you're sensing the tremors of your other selves, the ones who didn't survive, the ones who took a different path, the ones who look up at the stars and wonder the same thing. Is this really me? And yet, you wake up every day, you remember, you continue, you persist. So maybe that's all you ever was, a persistence of memory, riding the branch where awareness didn't fade, not because you're special, not because you earned it, but because that's the only place awareness exists. Everything else is silence. But here, now, reading these words, you are alive, and maybe that's enough. But if this is the branch where you live, then by necessity, it's also the branch where all your other selves didn't, and now, their absence becomes part of your presence. Every survival writes a shadow. Every breath sings a requiem for the versions of you that didn't make it. This is the unbearable tension of many worlds, that to exist is to erase, that for every choice made, 1,000 selves fall away into the branches you'll never feel. And if the self is not singular, then your identity is not a soul, it's a pattern, a probability cloud, a structure of awareness etched into the wave function. You are real, but not unique. alive, but not alone. At some point, every idea breaks under its own weight. You follow it down a corridor of logic, door after door swinging open into deeper truths until suddenly the hallway loops. You realize you've been walking in a circle, and now you're no longer discovering. You're trapped. That's where quantum immortality takes us. Because if you believe in the many worlds interpretation, and if you follow its consequences, and if you accept the idea that all possible outcomes do happen, then somewhere along that spiral, meaning collapses, you don't reach enlightenment, you reach absurdity. Physicist and philosopher David Aguirre warned of this. He said the idea of quantum immortality isn't just unsettling, it's a reductio ad absurdum, a philosophical dead end, a place where your theory proves too much, stretches too far, and devours the very structure that gave it life. Because what is the universe, if not a space of causes and effects? And what are causes if not choices? And what are choices if they're all inevitable? You see the spiral? It tightens. You're not making decisions. You're watching every possible outcome play out, like channels on a cosmic television where you only ever see the one you survived. You're not shaping reality. You're drifting through it, carried by the current of the surviving self. And then the final twist. You're not even choosing to drift. That too is predetermined, written into the architecture of the wave function. You are not the author. You are a line of code, executed without oversight, obeying a logic that never asked your permission. And yet, you feel like you remember childhood, you hurt, you love, you grieve, and all of that is supposed to be a byproduct of probability curves, of spin states, and decoherence. It sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous, but it might also be true. And that's the unbearable tension we find ourselves in, caught between a theory that predicts too much and a reality that feels too specific to be chance. Maybe you're not the product of randomness. Maybe you're the consequence of it, the path that accidentally stayed alive. But then we return to the real world. We pay bills, we brush our teeth, we forget, and we wonder why. If the many worlds interpretation is true, if we're splitting reality, with every breath we don't feel it, we don't hear the echo, we don't glimpse the flicker. The answer, again, is decoherence, that silent killer of interference. It ensures that the branches of reality split cleanly, irreversibly, that no signal can pass between them. Once split, they are separate forever, and yet, somehow, we don't believe it. We feel like we should be able to remember the other lives, to glimpse the other branches, to know. Some people report déjà vu, others, sudden grief for choices they never made. Some feel as if they've been here before, not in this life, but in one near it close enough to touch. Is that memory? Is that emotion? Or is it interference, the ghosts of the other you, still echoing faintly in your brain? Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's just imagination. But in a universe where everything happens, even imagination starts to sound like testimony. And if all outcomes are real, then so are all beliefs. The believer and the skeptic both exist in different branches. So who's right? No one, and everyone. This is what makes the many worlds interpretation so dangerous. It's too flexible. It cannot be falsified. It adapts to every result. It accepts every contradiction. And in doing so, it risks becoming meaningless. If a theory explains everything, it explains nothing. But still, the math works. Still, the predictions hold. Still, the universe refuses to collapse. So we face a paradox. We're standing on a theory that keeps proving itself in experiment after experiment, yet the philosophical ground beneath us is turning to sand. It's like watching a painting come to life, only to realize the artist never existed. You want to believe in order, in reason, in a universe you can touch, taste, test. But here you are, staring at equations that suggest your very identity is an illusion. That the version of you who just blinked may be slightly different than the one who opened their eyes a second ago. That your awareness is not a flame, but a flicker. And yet, you go on, you always go on. Is that hope? Or is it just the branch that hasn't ended? Maybe the reason you're still alive is not because you're meant to be, but because all the other versions of you are already dead. Maybe you're not the chosen one. Maybe you're the leftover. The last light in a long hallway of extinguished possibilities. But even if that's true, there's still beauty in it. Because if you are the flicker that remains, then what will you do with it? Will you grieve the branches you've lost? Or will you honor them? Will you crumble under the weight of infinite selves? Or will you rise for the ones who didn't make it? That perhaps is the one choice you still have. Even in a universe where every path exists, how you walk it still matters. Even if you're not the author, you're still the voice. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to give meaning to the madness. The 27th of October, 1962, a Soviet submarine, submerged off the coast of Cuba, listens for instructions that never come. Tensions are boiling. On land, nuclear weapons are pointed across oceans. In the Blackwater, US, destroyers drop practice depth, charges an aggressive signal meant to compel the sub to surface. But the captain doesn't see it that way. He believes war has begun. He gives the order, arm the torpedo, a 10-kiloton nuclear warhead enough to start a cascade of retaliations, enough to destroy cities, enough to ignite World War I-II. 2 officers agree, 1 refuses. His name is Vasily Arkhipov, and in our branch of reality he says no. He saves the world, and we go on. But in the many worlds interpretation, the other choices were not erased. In those other branches, the torpedo was launched. Cities burned. Families never met. Civilizations never resumed. In those branches, you're not reading this because you're not there. In a universe where all outcomes happen, our continued existence may not be a result of luck, wisdom, or diplomacy. It may simply be a selection effect. In every history where humanity destroyed itself, no one survived to ask why. No one remained to ponder what went wrong. But in this narrow thread, this rare sliver of possibility, conscious observers remained. And that's us. Here, now. This is not poetry. It's probability. We live in a timeline of survivors, because only survivors experience timelines. And this logic applies not just to global events, but to personal ones. You survived the crash. You survived the illness. You survived your own mistakes. You didn't notice the branches where you didn't, because awareness is a filter. You will always feel like the version who pulled through, even if the odds were impossibly low. And in retrospect, the story becomes inspiring, courageous, miraculous. But maybe it was just inevitable. In at least one world, someone always makes it out. In this one, that someone was you. And this brings us to a dark mirror. What if all of history is just a sequence of failures we didn't witness? What if every terrible possibility came true in countless branches but not here? What if our branch is not the one where the best things happened, but merely the one where we weren't erased? Think about how unlikely your existence is. How many ancestors had to survive war, famine, disease, accident? How many sperm had to win? How many cells had to divide correctly? How many decisions had to go exactly right for you to open your eyes in this specific moment, in this specific timeline? It feels impossible. It is impossible, unless you consider that in all the other timelines, the yous who didn't survive are simply no longer conscious. They are gone, not metaphorically, but subjectively. They can't perceive, can't question, can't ask. Only you can, because you are the residue of survival. And that changes how we view history. It becomes not a celebration of human triumphs, but a filter of consciousness. The disasters still happened. They just happened in the other branches, the unchosen paths, the silenced timelines. And we, in this thin corridor of peace and probability, feel like the main story. We're not. We're just the story that could be told. And now, the paradox sharpens. If we only experience survival, then we should expect to live in a timeline where survival always occurs. But how long can that continue? At what point does the sheer weight of probabilities crush the corridor flat? When does the next missile not get stopped? When does the disease mutate just slightly faster? When does the choice no one could see not get reversed? And here's the terrifying twist. According to the logic of quantum immortality, you might never notice, because in the branches where you don't survive, you simply won't be there to care. So again, you'll continue, and again, but others won't. Your friends, your family, the strangers across the globe, they might not follow you down this path of persistent awareness. In time, you may find yourself in branches where fewer and fewer familiar voices remain, until you are alone, not because everyone left, but because in your path they didn't make it. What began as a celebration of infinite possibilities is now something lonelier, the last ember of a fire no one else remembers. And still, you go on. This is the unbearable beauty of many worlds. It doesn't care what you want. It doesn't preserve what matters to you. It preserves everything, and in doing so, it becomes alien, inhuman. It contains the branches where we achieved peace, and those where we destroyed it. It contains the branches where civilizations rise from ash, and the ones where they never had the chance. We don't live in the best of all possible worlds. We live in the one where we survived, just long enough to say, we're still here. And maybe that's why it feels so fragile. Because it is. You can't touch the other timelines, but you can imagine them. You can feel the pressure of their nearness like ghosts leaning through a mirror that never breaks. And sometimes, late at night, you wonder, what if we're only alive because we have to be? What if this moment isn't a triumph, but a consequence? And what if this is the last branch? You fell asleep last night, or at least someone did. Someone with your name, your thoughts, your life. They closed their eyes in this same bed, in this same world, but now you've woken up and you feel slightly different. You can't explain it. Nothing's out of place, but something is. A mood you didn't have, a vague sense of having stepped out of a dream with no clear door back. What if this isn't just a feeling? What if, while you slept, the universe branched again, and the version who woke up isn't exactly the same? You were unconscious, vulnerable. The world shifted behind your closed eyes, and when you returned, your continuity of self, the fragile illusion of being one mind through time, just picked up where it left off. But what if that continuity is a trick? What if every night we slide between branches, some so subtle that our memories barely notice, others so radical we can only digest them as dreams? Physicist Anthony Aguirre explored this haunting idea in Cosmological Koans. He wondered, if quantum immortality means you always survive, always remain conscious, then how do we explain unconsciousness? Sleep? Anesthesia? Comas? If consciousness is the only thing keeping your thread alive, then shouldn't you always exist in the branch where you never lose it? Shouldn't there be versions of you that never sleep? And yet, we do sleep. We surrender to it willingly. We lose ourselves to silence for hours at a time. Entire lifetimes unfold in our minds and collapse with a breath. When you wake, where have you returned from? Is it the same branch, or is it just a close one? Dreams are a kind of twilight consciousness, a place where logic bends, identity melts, and impossible things feel natural. Some cultures believe dreams were journeys, not metaphors, literal excursions into other realities. What if they were right? What if dreaming is the echo of a branching process? Your brain, tuned not just to memory, but to interference, the ghostly shimmer of other versions of you bleeding through the wall of decoherence? You've had that feeling. You dream of a place you've never seen, but feel like you have. You dream of people with names you don't remember, but emotions you deeply feel. You wake up crying from a life you can't explain. A house, a loss, a love, and it fades, but the ache stays, and maybe that ache is real. Not because the dream was literal, but because it wasn't entirely imaginary either. Maybe it was emotional residue from a branch you'll never see again, a version of you that turned left when you turned right, a goodbye you never got to say, a timeline where the words were said differently. If the multiverse exists, then your mind isn't just a lantern shining in the dark, it's a radio, and sometimes it picks up static. Sometimes it hears a life that isn't yours, but almost was. And that's where memory becomes fragile, because memory is not truth. Memory is narrative. It is a reconstruction, and even in a classical world, it's flawed. In the quantum multiverse, it's worse because the narrator changes. Slightly, quietly, constantly. Every tiny shift creates a new you, a new perceiver, a new continuity stitched together from an almost identical fabric. And because the differences are small, because you don't remember dying, you believe nothing changed. But maybe everything did. This is the soft evidence of the multiverse. Not particle accelerators or interferometers, but your own perception, your awareness, your sense of strangeness you can't articulate. The uncanny pattern of lives you feel near but can't name. Maybe déjà vu isn't a glitch. Maybe it's a sync point where two branches overlapped so perfectly for a moment that you felt it. That sensation that you've been here before, maybe you have, in another world, with another outcome. And then there are the decisions, the big ones. You don't know why you said yes instead of no, why you turned left instead of right, why you called someone you haven't spoken to in years and just happened to say the one thing they needed to hear. Sometimes, the timing feels too perfect, too improbable, too cinematic. What if those moments aren't random? What if they're interference from the branches where you didn't say yes, didn't make the call, didn't survive? What if you're haunted by your own unchosen lives? Quantum immortality doesn't require you to notice these things, but maybe you do anyway. Maybe the edges blur. Maybe your consciousness, far more complex than any measurement device, is sensitive to more than just the here and now. Maybe you are bleeding through, just enough to feel the other yous out there searching too. And maybe that's what dreams are. Not stories, but meetings, silent collisions of versions, shared spaces between diverging minds. You don't remember the details because the brain can't hold two narratives at once. But the feeling remains, the deep pull of a life unlived. And when you wake, you're not the same, not Kite. You go on, always. But maybe, every now and then, you bring something back with you, a sliver of emotion, a farce you can't forget, a decision that feels heavier than it should. And you wonder, what if I didn't wake up in the same world I went to sleep in? What if I'm already in a new branch? What if the only reason I'm alive is because I always wake up? You've been told that science seeks answers, that physics reveals the fabric of reality, and that beneath the equations and experiments lies a kind of order, a structure that, when finally understood, will show us who we are. But what if it does the opposite? What if the closer we get to understanding the quantum realm, the more we realize there is no self to find? Not a ghost in the machine, not a soul, not even a you, just a shifting wave function, folding and unfolding across possibility. And you're the illusion that one fold was permanent. The many worlds interpretation was never just a theory about particles. It was a slow and merciless deconstruction of identity, a surgical dismantling of everything we cling to when we say, I am me. Because if the universe splits with every quantum interaction, and if each branch contains a version of you, then there is no continuity, no singular thread, no essence that persists unchanged, only echoes, probabilities, a statistical cloud of selves who all think they are you, but none of them are more true than the others. And that's the problem, because when physics starts speaking like this, it stops sounding like a description of matter and starts sounding like a rejection of meaning. Who are you, if not the sum of your memories? But memories can be copied. They can be encoded, preserved, deleted, misremembered. They can exist identically in thousands of branches, and each version believes theirs are real. Who are you, if not your choices? But choices diverge. Every possibility occurs. You choose every path. In some world, you fail and succeed. You live and die. You love and lose, and never meet at all. All versions happen. All stories unfold. So which you is you? Who are you, if not the observer? But even that breaks down. In quantum mechanics, the observer isn't special. It's not a privileged consciousness. It's any interaction. A photon, a detector, a molecule. You are not the agent of reality. You are another variable in its evolution. You don't collapse the wave function. You ride it. And so the final illusion falls. The illusion of the self as central. You are not the main character. You are not chosen. You are not eternal. You are entangled with everything, with everyone, with every possible version of yourself you'll never meet. Your I is not an indivisible unit. It is a phenomenon, a ripple in the multiverse, briefly stable, then gone. Some physicists have tried to avoid this conclusion. They cling to terms like reference class and effective identity. They hope that by refining the definitions, they can still save some version of the self. But the deeper they dig, the more they find themselves redefining personhood into dust. Philosopher David Wallace put it best. Maybe many worlds doesn't just describe a universe with multiple selves. Maybe it destroys the very concept of selfhood altogether. And once that falls, what's left? What happens when the thing we trusted most, our own awareness, turns out to be just a recursive echo in an infinite branching tree? Even the black hole information paradox feels tame compared to this. At least there, two theories clash: general relativity and quantum mechanics. But here, the conflict isn't between equations, it's between reality and experience. Between the world that is and the person who feels like they're inside it. You are both, and neither. You're a story the universe keeps rewriting in every direction, and the moment you try to grasp the whole of it, it slips away. The soul has always been a mystery, in religion, in philosophy, in art, but now physics stares into that same mystery and returns with silence. Not because it has no answer, but because it's asking a different question. What is you in a universe where everything that can happen does happen? What is you in a system where your awareness only persists in branches where it can? What is you if the you asking these questions is just one flicker in a firework of selves, none of whom can claim to be the original? Maybe there never was an original. Maybe the idea of a singular you was the final classical illusion, the last remnant of a world we thought was solid, predictable, centered. And maybe that's the lesson quantum mechanics has been trying to teach us all along. That reality doesn't revolve around us. It doesn't exist to be perceived. It is vast, indifferent, and gloriously unstable. And in its infinite dance of wave functions and branches and selves, it gave rise to something that thinks for a moment, I am. Not because it had to, but because the math allowed it. And then it moved on. So where does that leave us? Adrift? Alone? No, not kite. Because even if the self is an illusion, even if we are just patterns rising and falling in an infinite quantum sea, there is still something sacred about being this pattern, right now, in this branch. You are here, you are aware, and no theory, not even the cold, exacting machinery of physics, can take that away. This is your moment, whether you are one mind or many, whether you are a soul or a simulation, whether you are the original or just the echo. There's a moment after every storm when the silence feels heavier than the wind, when the world stands still, and you begin to see the pieces not as broken, but simply rearranged. That's where we are now. You've faced the quantum abyss. You've watched the self dissolve. You've seen death stripped of finality and identity unmade by physics. But now, in the aftermath, something new begins to take shape. Not an answer, not even clarity, but a question with softer edges. If all possible outcomes exist, then what becomes of our dreams? Not just the ones we chase, but the ones we've lost, the lives we never lived, the people we almost became, the moments that passed us by like trains we missed without even knowing the schedule. In this multiverse, they're not gone, they're real. Somewhere out there, on another branch of this infinite tree, you took the leap. You made the call. You forgave. You held on. You let go. Somewhere, a different version of you found the courage you couldn't, to the strength you thought was lost, the love you buried too deep to reach. And though you'll never meet that version, though your paths have split like rivers heading to separate seas, you can still feel them. In that quiet ache behind your choices, in the unexplainable longing for places you've never seen, in the dreams where your childhood house still stands, untouched by time. Maybe those aren't illusions. Maybe they're echoes. Maybe they're reminders that even in the face of infinite divergence, possibility itself is sacred. Because while physics may strip away our certainty, it leaves us with something better. A canvas, endless, expansive, undeniably real. And in that canvas, there's comfort. Not because we get to control the outcomes, but because those outcomes exist at all. Because for every heartbreak, there's a version of you who healed. For every goodbye, a version who said the words they couldn't. For every regret, a mirror where it turned out differently. This isn't escapism. It's a kind of metaphysical grace. You can't access those branches. You can't rewind, but you can honor them because they're part of the greater You, the multiversal self, the sum of every fork and flicker, not a soul, but a constellation of stories, all orbiting a shared origin, this moment, this awareness, this fragile, fleeting breath. And here's the twist. Just as you long for the paths you didn't take, maybe those other yous long for this one. Maybe the version of you who left the relationship wonders what might have happened if they'd stayed. Maybe the version who became rich wonders who they would have been if they hadn't. Maybe the one who never met her, never wrote the book, never ran the race, maybe he dreams of you. You are his echo, you are her hope, and in that mutual yearning we find meaning. Because quantum immortality may strip away the uniqueness of any one version, but it grants a strange kind of immortality through variation, through branching, through infinite resonance. You do not live forever, but some version of you always does. In some future, you lived long enough to hold your great-grandchild. In another, you found peace before your final breath. In one, you never needed to be saved. And those stories matter. They matter because they show us that the best parts of ourselves, the nobility, the bravery, the love, are not impossible. They're simply waiting in branches we didn't take. And even if we didn't live them, someone did. A version of us who isn't more real, just different. And that changes how we see the people around us too. Because if you are one branch of a vast unfolding wave, so is everyone else. That stranger you passed on the street, there's a version of them who became your best friend, your spouse, your enemy, your savior. There's a timeline where your lives intertwined, like stars caught in each other's gravity. And though you'll never feel it in this world, the potential of that connection is written into the structure of existence. And maybe that's what empathy is. Maybe empathy is the subconscious recognition of all those unchosen entanglements, the sense that behind every face is a whole forest of realities where they became central to your story. And maybe that's enough to soften us, to humble us, to remind us that even in a cold, branching universe, meaning is never absent. It's just decentralized. It's not about one story winning. It's about all stories existing. And your awareness, this sliver of self that experiences this version, is sacred not because it's special, but because it's happening here, now, despite all the odds. So when you grieve what you lost, remember, some version of you still holds it. When you mourn who you didn't become, know that someone did. When you fear you're too late, understand that elsewhere, you were right on time. And that's not fantasy, that's physics. It's the raw implication of a universe where the wave function never collapses, where the story never ends, where everything that can be is. And you're still writing. So write something beautiful, not because it will echo, but because you will. It always ends with silence, not a bang, not a scream, just a quiet stillness that follows every question we've ever asked. What is life? What is death? What is me? The silence never answers, but it listens. And in that listening, we feel something like truth. Quantum immortality was never just about physics. It was a window into the soul we're no longer sure we have, a way to confront the unbearable fact that one day we will stop, that our stories will end mid-sentence, that the people we are fragile, fierce, unfinished might vanish without ever knowing why, unless they don't, unless the wave never collapses, unless, in some corner of the multiverse, you wake up again, and again, and again. Not as the same person, but as someone close enough to believe it's still you, close enough to carry the torch forward, close enough to say, I'm still here. But this isn't hope as we know it. It's not resurrection. It's not heaven. It's not reward. It's something stranger, something colder. It's continuity without comfort. Because quantum immortality doesn't promise peace. It promises persistence, a thread through the chaos, a version of you always crawling forward, sometimes whole, sometimes shattered, sometimes barely conscious yet still alive. And what do we do with that? Do we call it a miracle or a prison? Do we thank the universe for never letting us fade? Or do we beg it to stop? Maybe the answer lies not in physics, but in the stories we tell ourselves. Because somewhere in all of us is a desire deeper than survival, the desire to matter, to mean something, to be more than just a fleeting calculation in the cosmic equation. We want our lives to ripple. We want our choices to echo. We want to believe that love changes things, that suffering isn't wasted, that sacrifice carves something permanent into the walls of time. And if many worlds is true, maybe it does. Maybe the version of you who stood up when it counted that echo still sings. Maybe the branch where you forgave, or endured, or chose kindness that resonance still carries. Not because it was seen, not because it was celebrated, but because it was, in a universe that remembers everything. Perhaps goodness is its own reward. Not moral, not spiritual, just eternal. Somewhere, right now, a version of you is whispering the words you never had the courage to say. Somewhere, you're holding the hand you lost in this world. Somewhere, the world you prayed for is unfolding quietly, impossibly, beautifully, and even though you'll never see it, that dream mattered. It split the wave. It wrote a new future. It became real. And maybe that's enough, because this isn't a story about how you live forever. It's a story about how you were never just one life to begin with. You are a chorus of lives, a constellation of outcomes, a map of moments, branching endlessly in every direction. You are not a single echo. You are the song. And yes, you will die. In this branch, in this body, one day it will end. There will be no music, no light, just the curtain, just the quiet. But maybe, just maybe, somewhere, another version of you will open their eyes, not knowing how close they came, not knowing how many selves stood behind them, and they will live, they will laugh, they will fall in love, or make mistakes, or walk into the unknown, unaware of how many yous didn't make it. But they'll carry something unspoken, a trace of every version who came before, a rhythm passed forward, a pulse in the fabric of what we call awareness. And the story will go on, because stories are what the universe does best. It tells them through particles, and light, and time. And once, it told one through you. So what now? After all these questions, after all this wonder, after all these spirals of thought that stretch across science, consciousness, and the very definition of self, you're still here, still breathing, still holding this one precious moment in your hand, like a snowflake that melts the second you try to describe it. So live it, not because it's the only one that matters, but because it's the one you have, the one you remember, the one that can still choose. Maybe you are immortal, maybe not. Maybe this is the last branch, or maybe it's just one leaf on a tree, so vast the roots stretch across every timeline, every possibility, every whisper of everything that could ever be. But no matter how many branches the universe bears, there has never been, and never will be, another you quite like this one. And in that truth, there is something sacred,